Hey, what's up guys? Joker here. Today we're going to be taking a look at the new benchmark on 3D Mark, which is the Port Royal benchmark, which came out a few weeks back, but now there is actually an update to that, which is going to be adding in DLSS support, which is NVIDIA's deep learning super sampling, which something has been talked about a lot since the announcement of RTX graphics cards. However, up until now, the implementation has pretty much been nil. In fact, even there's only one game so far that actually supports ray tracing. That's Battlefield 5. So still a lot of the features that were promised with RTX cards are nothing more than a promise that gamers are waiting for. So this is something that we can at least take a look at for now to see what types of performance improvements we could maybe expect later on down the road once more titles are supporting DLSS. And it is something that I am excited to see implemented, especially after the results that I got here today, where I saw nearly 100% performance improvement in running the Port Royal benchmark at 4K. But first, a quick thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Squarespace is the perfect place to host your domain, website, or online store. Now, before we get into those results, I just want to talk a little bit about the Port Royal benchmark, and really the point of it. There's not a large point to it, honestly, because one of the big reasons to have a benchmark is to be able to compare things, but right now, all you can compare is the different tiers of NVIDIA RTX cards from the 2060 all the way up to the 2080 Ti. That's really all you could do with it. Since AMD cannot run it on their graphics cards, there's no way that we could justifiably use a benchmark like this in a review for, let's say, the upcoming Radeon 7. It would be absolutely pointless. We would have to run the TimeSpy Extreme benchmark instead, which supports DirectX 12, but it doesn't have ray tracing like the Port Royal benchmark. So right now, we can only test the newest high-end NVIDIA cards with the Port Royal benchmark, let alone using the DLSS features, which also require you to be on the latest driver from NVIDIA, which is 418.81. So as long as you own 3D Mark and you have the latest driver from NVIDIA and you're running an RTX graphics card, then you could run the Port Royal benchmark for yourself and you can get an idea of the performance improvements you would see conceivably in a real game, with DLSS turned on and all of that. And it is very, very impressive. And I would even say visually, it's on par with 4K, even when I was running it at 1440p. So when I initially did a first test with 1440p, it looked really bad just in native resolution, but when it put on DLSS, basically super sampling it, it looked really crisp, and I was like, wow, that actually looks like a native 4K image to me. And then running it in 4K, obviously the performance was in the toilet running 4K with ray tracing and all of that. The performance was like down below 20 frames per second throughout pretty much the entire run, but switching on DLSS saw that shoot up to like 40 FPS, so it was a nearly 100% improvement in performance on 4K, while at 1440p the performance improvement was not as much. It was only about 40%, which is still a lot. 40% is nothing to sneeze at, but in comparison to the 93% that I gained at 4K, it's not that big of a difference. In case you are interested in the specs on my system, you can see on my normal Port Royal run here with my system here that I'm running an RTX 2080 Ti and an Intel i9 9900K. This is my rig. You can see that it's got the right memory count. You can see my overclock, which is 2055 megahertz. That's like peak, really. It's sometimes run around 2 gigahertz to 2.05, so it can vary in there. Memory's overclocked as well. The latest driver, as I said, Intel i9 9900K overclocked to 5 gigahertz. I do have an AVX offset of 2, so if any of the overlays you saw 4.8, that's because it can bounce around between 4.8 and 5 gigahertz, depending on if an AVX workload is running, which in some games and benchmarks is the case. 8 cores, 16 threads, as it's a 9900K on the Z390 Aorus Master with 32 gigabytes of RAM, 2 DIMMs, all running at 3200 megahertz, and off a crucial NVMe M.2 drive. And as I said, with 1440p, I gained around 41% roughly. I went from 39.14 average FPS up to 55.18. So seeing something like that, you can realize that if you were using DLSS, at 1440p, you would take a game that was running at 40 FPS, maybe not as enjoyable to run up to 55. That's a really nice gain. However, at 4K, the numbers are that much more impressive, where I went from an average of 18.12 FPS, I think we can all agree is utterly unplayable garbage to an average of 34.85%, which was a 92.33% improvement in performance at 4K. And 34 FPS still wouldn't be great, but like right now, for instance, if I play Battlefield 5 with ray tracing on Ultra at 4K, I get around 35 to 40 FPS on my 2080 Ti. So if I were to be able to put on DLSS, that would very likely take me over 60 frames per second with a visual image that was virtually just as crisp and clean as the native 4K one, with very little discernible difference unless you're really zooming in and looking at, certain elements of the game, which you're not going to do in a first-person shooter. The performance improvement there would be massive, and it would be one that would allow me to use ray tracing at 4K ultra settings rather than playing it on 4K right now at DX11, where I get like 120 frames per second, which is awesome. But with ray tracing on, the performance is just like half of that, if not even worse, than just running at DX11 native 4K. And one final shout out to Squarespace, who are fantastic if you want to set up your very own website or host an e-commerce page for an online shop. They've got tons of easy to use and fully customizable templates to choose from for beginners all the way up to advanced users. So head over to squarespace.com/jokerproductions with the link down in the description below, and you'll get 10% off of your first purchase with Squarespace. So that's all I've got for you here today on the Port Royal benchmark and the DLSS performance improvements. I think, like I said, this is very exciting stuff. It's very promising. But until we actually do see it in a game where the players can control the camera, because this is a very closed, sequence that is controlled, you can't do anything. It's just on rails. So I am curious to see what it's like when you actually get into a game and it's fast-paced and you're moving around the camera a lot. Like, is it going to leave any artifacting as a result of doing that kind of stuff, fast-paced movements? That's something we just can't really judge yet until we're actually able to play a game with it. And I just want something. Just give me something with this in a game, please. Like, or waiting. They said it just works. Well, if it just works, then why isn't it working already? Like, Metro Exodus is coming out. I don't know if it's going to have ray tracing and DLSS at launch. If they've said something about it in the press that maybe I've missed, let me know down in the comments below. I would hope that it was at least launching with ray tracing, but I also want to see a DLSS because I'm pretty sure there's no way in hell I'm going to be able to run Metro Exodus 4K maxed out with DXR turned on. It's not realistic. I would imagine that's going to run at sub 30 FPS. I would like to be surprised, but I don't think that's going to be the case. So I want DLSS so I could actually play the game with everything turned up to the to the hilt and see how the game actually is. So I'm excited for DLSS. Let me know down in the comments below if you enjoyed this video or learned something new. Don't forget to leave a thumbs up on it down below. Subscribe if you're not already. And if you have been here for a while, you can always ring the notification bell. That way you never miss a moment of content when it goes up live here on the channel. And I'll see you guys tomorrow for another video. Sarah.